Tonight, the White House says it was absolutely the right thing to do. The administration fires back at critics of the deal to exchange 5 terror suspects for a U.S. Army sergeant held by the Taliban. Reports from David Martin, Major Garrett, and Begad Shaban. John Blackstone is following the nationwide manhunt for Ryan Chamberlain after the FBI found explosives in his San Francisco apartment. Dr. John LaPook on a promising new treatment for women with advanced cervical cancer. And living history, Dean Reynolds with one of the Americans who helped liberate Europe 70 years ago this week.
Did you ever think you were going to die?
Sure, every day.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Scott is off tonight. I'm Maurice Dubois. The joy and relief that usually accompany the release of an American POW are being overshadowed tonight by criticism of the deal that won his freedom and questions about how he was captured in the first place. 28-year-old Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl is in a U.S. military hospital in Germany tonight. The Taliban released him over the weekend in exchange for 5 terror suspects held at Guantanamo. David Martin begins our coverage.
Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl is listed in stable condition and for the moment is isolated from the controversy surrounding his release. Among other things, he is suffering from 5 years of a prisoner's diet. But his biggest problem may be the reception waiting for him in the U.S. Former members of his unit have taken to the airwaves and social media, calling him a deserter and alleging other soldiers were actually killed searching for him. Josh Corder, a former sergeant in Bergdahl's unit, has the names of those soldiers tattooed on his body. He spoke with CNN.
They were never nationally televised for their sacrifices in the way that he is, and he pretty much voluntarily walked away and in turn caused the actions that may have killed them.
Bergdahl allegedly sneaked away from his outpost after his early morning shift on guard duty, leaving his weapon and body armor behind. As for why he did it, there were conflicting reports. He wanted to walk across Afghanistan, make friends in the local community, or even fight for the Taliban. Bergdahl has not been charged with anything and actually received 2 promotions during his 5 years in captivity. But a Pentagon official described him as at worst a deserter, at best a stupid kid who caused us to expend great energy and resources to bring him home. This official said many in the military think Bergdahl should be court-martialed, while others argue 5 years in captivity is punishment enough.
Bergdahl could return to the U.S. as early as the end of this week, at which point he would be reunited with his family and eventually get a chance to tell what no one has yet heard, his side of the story.
David Martin at the Pentagon, thank you. In response to criticism of the deal for the release of Bergdahl, the president's spokesman said today it was absolutely the right thing to do. Major Garrett is at the White House for us. Major?
Maurice, critics like Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina accused President Obama of releasing the Taliban Dream Team from Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Top advisors don't deny the 5 detainees traded for Bowe Bergdahl were not hardened Taliban killers, but the White House argues their release does not undermine U.S. national security.
All 5 detainees were active Taliban fighters and planners. 3 held leadership posts in the Taliban government. Mohammed Fazl was a former deputy minister of defense and founding Taliban member. Abdul Haq Wasiq was a former deputy intelligence minister and confidant of top Taliban leader Mullah Omar. Mullah Nurullah Nouri was a senior Taliban commander in northern Afghanistan and one of the highest-ranking Taliban held at Guantanamo. All 5 are now in Qatar, unable to leave for 1 year. Their activities will be monitored by authorities there. Today, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said there were sufficient safeguards in place.
Do you disagree with the characterization of the 5 released detainees as among the hardest of the hard and possibly responsible for the deaths of thousands of people?
We have a long history in this country, and our allies do as well, of exchanging prisoners in an armed conflict, especially when that armed conflict is coming to an end.
The White House argues that the end of combat operations at the end of this year in Afghanistan also justified the release of these 5 detainees. By the time the 5 leave Qatar, there will be fewer than 10,000 U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Maurice, the White House argues that will lower the threat to them if they return to the fight.
Now, Major, the president's required by law to give 30 days notice before releasing detainees from Guantanamo. What happened in this case?
Well, the White House argues the president as commander-in-chief had the authority to ignore that law if there was very little time to negotiate, which is exactly what the White House says occurred in this case and justified winning the release of Bowe Bergdahl. Republicans and Democrats who were supposed to have been briefed about all this are not yet convinced.
Okay, Major Garrett at the White House Force tonight, thank you. The controversy over Bergdahl has reached his hometown in Idaho as it prepares a homecoming. Brigad Shaban is there.
The city offices in Haley were fielding calls today from across the country. Many were angry about the swap that released Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. That surprised Police Chief Jeff Gunter. He's a close friend of Janie and Bowe Bergdahl, Bowe's parents.
You've known Bob for nearly 25 years. How has this changed him?
Yeah, I've seen him go through the peaks and valleys, but it hasn't really changed him as a person. He's never lost faith in God. He's never lost faith that he wouldn't get his son back.
Bowe Bergdahl told Rolling Stone magazine that his son sent him an email on June 27, 2009. It expressed disillusionment with the mission in Afghanistan. Private Bergdahl wrote, "I am sorry for everything here." His father's reply was, "Obey your conscience." His son disappeared 3 days later. Over time, the Bergdahls had become frustrated with U.S. efforts to find their son. They tried to contact their son's captors through email and this internet video.
We must also thank those who have cared for our son for almost 2 years.
That long beard and lessons in the Pashto language were also attempts to demonstrate humility.
Not just anyone would attempt to learn the specific dialect of a Taliban tribe in Afghanistan.
Not anyone would, but Bob's not anyone. Bob's Bob.
Bergdahl's parents stayed out of the public view today, and Maurice, the city of Haley, plans on holding a celebration later this month.
Brigad Shaban in Haley, Idaho, thank you. There is a nationwide manhunt tonight for a San Francisco man suspected of possessing explosive materials. 42-year-old Ryan Chamberlain is described as a political and media consultant. John Blackstone on why the FBI is so concerned about him.
The manhunt for Ryan Chamberlain began as a hazardous materials team searched his San Francisco apartment, along with some 24 federal agents, local police, and firefighters. Sources say investigators found no working bombs in the apartment, but gathered explosive materials, now being studied in an FBI lab. Chamberlain's friends and associates received an online message this morning. Its source can't be verified, but it claims to be from Chamberlain and says, "So much was broken from this past year and a half. I guess it was just insurmountable, and the time's up."
I had no idea that he was struggling with these demons.
Alex Clements, a San Francisco political consultant, knows Chamberlain and briefly employed him.
This note does seem shocking because more than a threat to people, it does seem to be a suicide note.
It appears in its title, which is goodbye, and a lot of the language in it, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't there to stop it, to be a suicide note.
In the note, Chamberlain complains about breaking up with a girlfriend and losing a job. "I already had a tendency to slip into depression. This one hit me hard. I explored myriad ways I could put an end to what I was going through and scoured the internet, absorbing fuel for morbid fantasies."
It's those morbid fantasies that may be worrying the FBI. The FBI spokesman here in San Francisco says there's no immediate threat to public safety, Maurice, but he warns that Chamberlain could be armed and dangerous.
John Blackstone, thank you. Also being hunted tonight is a man considered dangerous for what he does on the computer. Today, federal prosecutors charged a Russian man with running 2 hacking schemes that stole more than $100 million from victims in the United States. Here's Homeland Security correspondent Bob Orr.
He's known by the alias Lucky 12345. His real name is Yevgeny Bogachev. Prosecutors say the alleged Russian cyber thief used malware codenamed Game Over Zeus to infect personal computers, steal bank account passwords, and transfer cash to his criminal networks. A Pennsylvania plastics company lost more than $198,000, and a Florida bank was ripped off for nearly $7 million. Deputy Attorney General James Cole.
Security researchers estimate that between 500,000 and 1 million computers worldwide are infected with Game Over Zeus.
Bogachev is also accused of running an online shakedown scheme called CryptoLocker. That virus infects computers and encrypts files, preventing owners from accessing their own data. Victims receive an on-screen message saying your personal files are encrypted. The hackers then demand a ransom in exchange for releasing the information. More than 120,000 Americans have been victimized by CryptoLocker. A North Carolina pest control company spent $80,000 trying to restore its damaged files, and a Massachusetts police department paid a $750 ransom to recover case files and mugshots.
Prosecutors say they've disrupted now both schemes by seizing control of the hackers' networks. But the fact is the fugitive Bogachev may never be prosecuted. Maurice, he remains in Russia tonight, beyond the reach of U.S. law.
Okay, Bob Orr, thank you. Federal investigators looking for the cause of a deadly plane crash near Boston recovered the flight recorders today. They've been poring over the wreckage of the Gulfstream jet owned by billionaire Louis Katz, a co-owner of the Philadelphia Inquirer. He and 6 others were killed Saturday night when the plane crashed and exploded on takeoff. Family members say the pilot and co-pilot worked for Katz for 10 years. The Obama administration took aim today at coal-fired power plants with a sweeping plan to cut carbon emissions by 26% by the year 2020 and 30% by 2030. Environmental groups applauded. Critics say it comes with a hefty price tag. Chip Reed looks at both sides.
More than 500 coal-fired power plants in the U.S. produce about 40% of the nation's electricity, but those plants are also the nation's largest emitters of greenhouse gases that are believed to be a major contributor to climate change. Gina McCarthy heads the Environmental Protection Agency.
If we do nothing in our grandkids' lifetimes, temperatures could rise 10 degrees and seas could rise by 4 feet.
Mike Duncan heads the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity, which represents the coal industry.
The majority of states, we believe, would see a double-digit increase in electricity prices.
A double-digit increase? And which states would get hit the hardest? In what part of the country?
Well, the states that rely the most on coal.
Duncan says that includes West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Wyoming. Jobs would also take a big hit, he says, estimating 500,000 jobs would be lost in the first year alone. But the White House says job losses would be more than offset by job growth in renewable energy, including wind, solar, and even trash. Paul Gilman is with Covanta Energy.
You've heard of reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, then you want to recover energy as well, and that's what we do at this plant.
Here on New York's Long Island, energy from trash powers about 11% of homes. Gilman says increasing the national recycling rate from 35 to 65% would produce enough energy to close 75 coal-fired power plants.
It will be up to the states to decide exactly how to cut emissions, and Maurice, this isn't going to happen anytime soon. The earliest this regulation could go into effect is a year from now, and some critics have already said they're going to sue, so it could be a lot longer than that.
All right, thank you very much. Chip Reed in Washington tonight. Doctors reported today on a new weapon in the fight against cancer, one that does not use drugs or radiation, but enlists the patient's own body to attack cancer cells. We asked Dr. John LaPook to tell us more.
At 35, Erica Wallace learned she had advanced cervical cancer that had spread to her lymph nodes.
It just kind of became, all right, just deal with it. Tell me what I need to do because I'm a mom and I need to be here for my boys.
Intensive chemotherapy did not work. The Wallaces were told Erica had about a year to live.
I had to discuss, what if I'm not here? You know, what's going to happen with the boys, because I could feel I was getting weaker, and so I was pretty rock bottom at that moment.
Just 2 months later, she became patient number 2 in a small trial using the body's immune system to seek out and destroy metastatic cervical cancer. Dr. Christian Hinrichs at the NIH Clinical Center leads the trial.
The treatment that we do, we completely rearrange the immune system.
Doctors take a piece of the tumor and extract specialized white blood cells, or T cells. Those are tumor-fighting cells sent by the body's immune system to target the cancer. The T cells most potent against cervical cancer are selected and grown in the lab. Billions of these cells are then infused into the patient's bloodstream.
The idea is to give a single treatment and have the cells wipe out the tumor the same way that they would clear an infection.
6 of 9 patients in the study had no response, and 1 had a partial response. 2 had complete remission. Wallace was one of those two. This is a scan from her checkup last week. Nearly 2 years after treatment, there is no sign of cancer. Earlier this year, her younger son Marcus had a chance to meet the research team.
He looked at them and said, "Thanks for saving my mom." And that's what NIH has done, is saved me.
Although only 2 of 9 patients were successfully treated, Dr. Hinrich says this is the first time this kind of therapy has provided a long-term remission in somebody with cancer of the cervix. The hope is to use this same approach for other solid tumors such as breast, lung, and colon.
Which would be remarkable. Dr. John LaPook, thank you. In Spain, King Juan Carlos said today he is abdicating after nearly 4 decades on the throne. Now 76, he led Spain's transition from dictatorship to democracy, but his popularity has suffered because of a corruption scandal. Juan Carlos will be succeeded by his son, the Crown Prince Philippe. President Obama is heading to Europe tonight, first to Poland for meetings on the crisis in Ukraine, and then to Belgium and France for ceremonies marking the 70th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. Our senior White House correspondent, Bill Plants, will be covering that, as he did the 50th anniversary in 1994.
We're at the other side of the cemetery on the seawall, just a stone's throw from Omaha Beach.
Just one of the many stories Bill Plant has covered since he joined CBS News 50 years ago this week. Congratulations, Bill. Also returning to Normandy this week is Jim Martin. He'll be parachuting in again. His story is next. We end tonight with a man who not only witnessed history, he helped make it. 70 years ago this week, Jim Martin was part of the Allied invasion of Normandy, the beginning of the liberation of Europe from the Nazis. He told this story to Dean Reynolds.
On a winding road past a stand of sycamores outside his Ohio home, we found Jim Martin, 70 years after his first trip to France.
You must have been one of the first Americans in combat in Europe.
Among the first groups, yes. They called us the tip of the spear.
Jim was a private in the 101st Airborne, one of the paratroopers dropped behind German lines in the hours before the D-Day landings.
We wanted to get out of the plane quickly because it was hitting the planes. The planes were blowing up and we wanted to get the hell out of there.
They were inviting targets as they drifted toward the ground and the enemy.
You're slowly descending through the clouds in a parachute into hostile territory. What was going through your mind?
Fascination, because of all this fire coming up toward us.
Fascination?
Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating to see all these various colored tracers coming up there.
Their mission was to keep the Germans from reinforcing their troops on the dunes. Jim and his comrades landed right in the middle of those German reinforcements.
That was a slaughterhouse. There was SS all over the place, and they just slaughtered us. My colonel was lost, my company commander was lost.
But what was supposed to be 3 days of fighting in Normandy went on for a month.
That's the way we were trained. We accepted that. And no matter how many people are there against you, what the odds are, doesn't matter. We're going to win.
Jim went from Normandy to fight in Holland, where he was wounded, from Holland to the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, and from Belgium to Berchtesgaden, Germany, Adolf Hitler's retreat in the Bavarian Alps.
Did you ever think you were going to die?
Sure, every day.
How do you get over that?
You just have to accept it. If you're going to worry about dying all the time, you can't fight.
Jim is 93 now, one of the few left who can talk firsthand of a time when he says right was right and wrong was wrong and everyone knew the difference. And here's the best part. This week, he's going back to Normandy, where he intends to parachute, yes, parachute, onto the same soil he touched 7 decades ago.
I'm not usually looking for records or anything, but that would give me a great deal of satisfaction.
Bon voyage, Jim. Bon voyage. Dean Reynolds, CBS News, Xenia, Ohio.
And that is the CBS Evening News. Coming up tonight at 10, 9 Central, a special Monday edition of 48 Hours. For Scott Pelley, I'm Maurice Dubois. Thanks for watching. Good night.